Hello, thank you for tuning in to watch this recording. Um, my name's Hannah, and over the next 15 minutes, I'm going to share with you the findings from my PhD research, which is also heavily linked to my practice experience, which I'll share with you in just a moment. The focus of the next 15 minutes is not just the findings from the PhD research, but what that means in terms of next steps and how change can be implemented to improve both training and service delivery for the needs of children growing up with parents who misuse substances. My PhD journey began many years ago. In 2004, I began my social work journey. And the reason I wanted to become a social worker was because of my own lived experience. Understanding the needs of children living with parents who misuse substances and also the needs of affected family members is something that's very close to my heart because of my own family's experience. When I qualified as a social worker in 2007, I joined an adult drug and alcohol treatment service as a drugs worker before then moving to a specialist support team supporting children and family members affected by loved ones' substance use. It was after 13 years of frontline practice that my PhD journey began. And it was really out of frustration and sadness in equal measures that throughout my social work career, I've seen lots of changes, positive changes in terms of the responses in practice development and policy and legislation for vulnerable groups of children. But those changes haven't been the same for children who live with parents who misuse substances. And so my PhD journey began in seeking to understand the needs of children living with parental substance use and what changes were necessary, both in legislation, policy and practice. And I'm going to share with you the findings from the research and the changes to date as this journey continues. My thesis was titled Understanding the Needs of Children Living with Parental Substance Misuse, Perspectives of Children and Professionals. And after a thorough literature review, it was clear that there is a breadth and depth of research which understands and highlights, evidences the impact of parental substance use on children. And so for me, it was a question of, well, if we have the research, why are we not seeing those changes embedded in practice, both in terms of training, service delivery, and to even, 20 years this year after the publication of Hidden Harm in the UK, we are still seeing the needs of this group of children remain hidden harm. That these are a group of children who are failed on every level. The research questions that you can see on the screen guided the research design and hope throughout the remainder of this recording, I'll share with you the findings and how those findings help to answer these research questions about what children need, what's their lived experience, and what are the changes necessary, both in legislation, policy, and practice. So the research design was in two parts. 7 children aged 7 to 16 participated in creative interviews, and I'll share with you what it's meant, or what I mean, by creative interviews in just a couple of slides' time. The research was also important to include frontline practitioners who, in their everyday practice, endeavour to support the needs of children and family members affected by loved ones' substance use. The design of the focus groups was purposeful to ensure that the lived experience of frontline professionals was not just about social workers, but also practitioners in early help services, support services, and also in education, including primary and secondary schools. The Professionals who took part in the research shared heartfelt and emotive accounts of their experience in practice of supporting children who were enduring chronic neglect, who had endured harm, both in terms of physical and emotional abuse, children who were just not able to thrive and do well in school because of the hardship and the significant safeguarding concerns that professionals had about their home life. What was also evident throughout the focus groups, throughout all three, was the impact of austerity measures. So in the UK, we are over a decade into austerity, meaning that many of our frontline services have been cut completely or reduced. We're also seeing a huge cost of living crisis, and that means families who are already in poverty and deprivation were plunged into destitution. The impact on the professionals who participated was really profound. They shared their experience of not feeling equipped with knowledge or practice skills to know how to talk about substances, both with children and with parents. They weren't sure how to effectively assess the risk. And this left practitioners feeling really nervous about whether they were doing a good enough job to safeguard and protect children and their families. One social worker shared that without training, they wouldn't be able to have understood the lived experience of children they were supporting. And it was only after attending some specialist training on substance use and the impact of parental substance misuse on children that they were able to begin to see the world through a child's eyes. And this really astounds me that even after all of these years, with all of the research and the knowledge that we have, we are still not seeing this topic taught widely in universities as part of social work education or in safeguarding training in education and early help services. The training was absolutely key for this practitioner in not just understanding the lived experience of the children that they were supporting, but also it gave them the confidence to have sensitive and informed conversations with parents about their drug and alcohol use, which meant they were then able to signpost parents to appropriate support and have meaningful engagement with the families that they supported. So it just shows how important knowledge about the impact of parental substance misuse is. The children who participated in the research shared equally emotive and at times quite harrowing accounts of their lives. The children who participated were all children who lived at home, and so this was a real live account of their lived experience. This wasn't children who were older sharing retrospective accounts. These were all children living in the environment that they were sharing with me. Utilising all of my practice experience and all my years of creative and therapeutic support with children, I adapted some of my practice skills and practice knowledge as part of the research design. And so I used an activity that I'd found incredibly helpful for children in my practice. And the activity was, if alcohol or drugs could turn into an animal, what would it look like? And this activity afforded children the opportunity to tell their story at their pace, in their own time and in their own way. And through the characters, which in this case was Grey the beer elephant and the chemical tiger, Rue was able to share with me that when they saw the grey elephant and the chemical tiger, they were frightened. They saw chemical tigers coming into the house, which they later then described to me were often men coming into the house, often drunk, often with weapons, including a baseball bat on one occasion. What transpired from Rue's emotive account was that their mum owed money because of their substance use, and the story that Rue shared about her lived experience highlighted that there was a very real possibility that their mum was being exploited by men who were coming into the house to repay a drug debt. Rue described chemicals being, which was their choice of words for illicit drugs. They described drugs being put into their mum's mouth and their mum falling asleep. And Rue wasn't able to describe or share with me any further, but it was very clear from their response that this was incredibly frightening for them, and deeply saddened them. They talked about being frightened, being sad, being miserable. And as they so profoundly said, I'm seeing it and I'm only little. Children were given the option. I didn't presume that older children who participated would want to or would prefer this activity. All of the children had a choice to draw or to not draw at all or to just talk. But one of the other activities that was really useful in the creative interviews was the resilience tree. So children were encouraged to write and draw their worries that sat on the branches of the tree, because that's the most wobbliest part of the tree. And it was to represent the wobbly feeling when they had worries. The trunk represented all the things that they needed to feel able to cope and to feel strong. And the roots represented their support networks and what helped their tree to remain upright when things felt really wobbly. And what was absolutely critical to these children was being able to talk, having somebody to talk to, having people in their lives who they trusted, both within their family, but also professionals, especially people that they could trust in school. What was also clear from the research, particularly from the emotive account shared by practitioners within the focus groups, that the risk in terms of the impact of parental substance use didn't reduce as children grew older. They simply changed. And for many of the practitioners, there was a deep-rooted concern that when children experienced emotional neglect at home, they would often then seek to meet their own emotional needs in the community, which left children being at risk of or victims of child sexual exploitation or child criminal exploitation. And so what this research has highlighted is that the impact of parental substance use is not just about the physical impact on children, particularly younger children, but also of the emotional impact where emotional needs are not met. And therefore, we must never lose sight of the needs of older children. All of the children who participated in this research experienced multiple risk factors highlighted here on the screen. Some experienced all of these risks, but all children were failed by their macro system in terms of the impact of austerity and the cost of living crisis, which has plunged their families into deeper poverty. Children needed multiple protective factors. One trusted adult wasn't enough. They needed protective factors in every part of their lives, both at home, in the community. They needed to feel that they had somebody rooting for their success. They needed to have positive experiences, to have support, both at home and outside of the family home. And most importantly, to have a place of safety, either a grandparent or extended family member who they could go to when things got really tough at home. What was also clear from the research was that often models of practice in response to the needs of children living with parents who misuse substances didn't always meet the needs of this group of children. What this research has highlighted is that children need support in their own right, support that isn't dependent on their parents' engagement, and support that's not time limited. Children needed support for as long as they felt they needed it, and that decision needed to be made by them, not by practitioners. Children also expressed the need to have support in school, to have somebody who understood what life was like for them at home, to avoid being in trouble at school for not having done their homework, or to avoid being excluded if they weren't able to manage their behaviour in school. The lives of these children and the lives of children living with parents who misuse substances can be at best isolating and marginalising, but at worst enduring and incredibly frightening for children. They need support at the earliest opportunity, and support that's tailored for them. And so the impact to date is that within the local authority where I'm employed, which is in the northwest of England, a local authority called Stockport, parental substance use training is now firmly embedded within our safeguarding training offer, both for children's and adult services. We've changed the way in which local data is collated to make sure that children living with parents who misuse substances are not hidden behind generalised categories such as neglect or physical harm, that we can collate data so that the children living in Stockport who are in need of services because of increased safeguarding concerns are no longer hidden harm. We've also delivered training across the Northwest, and to date, hundreds of social workers have been trained nationally via Making Research Count and Manchester Metropolitan University's Substance Use and Associated Behaviours Research Centre. Manchester Metropolitan University have also included my thesis and practice guide to inform the design and delivery of their new parental substance use module, to ensure that all social workers training at Manchester Metropolitan University qualify and go into frontline practice with adequate knowledge about the needs of this group of children. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this recording. I know it's not live and therefore I can't answer questions, but by all means, please don't hesitate to email me if you have any further questions or wish me to clarify any of the information shared today. Thanks again for joining, and take care.